The idea of this ground round is to actually give you some of the tips from my experience in dealing with journals, especially in the field of ophthalmology. And basically, I mean, most of these things you might heard before, but I'll try to add to these things some of my experiences in the hope of increasing your chances of getting your papers accepted in ophthalmology journals. This, of course, applies to most scientific papers, you know, not necessarily in ophthalmology, but you can also apply it to other fields of medicine and basic science. This paper was recently published, and basically the researchers, what they did is actually compiled all ophthalmology research which done and was performed by Arab countries, and they used the database which is ISI Web of Science, and they ranked the Arab countries in terms of publications in ophthalmology. And the ranking of the countries came as number 1 was Saudi Arabia, 2 Egypt, Tunisia, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Kuwait, UAE, Jordan, and in the last place, Algeria. So basically the search they did, I read this paper carefully, and I went back to what they actually, the databases they used, and I found some flaws in the actual statistics they provided. And these flaws related to the fact that some researchers, for example, at the university, they might not write in their affiliations Department of Ophthalmology, so that research will not be counted. KKESH have advantage over KSU that if you say KKESH, then automatically it's ophthalmology, basically. So the interesting part in Saudi Arabia, KKESH came as number 1 with 430 publications, constituting about 47.3% of the total number of ophthalmology papers published by Arab countries. This paper was done in Nablus University in Palestine, and basically they used only one database, as I said. If I was doing something like that, certainly I would use more than one database. I would use ISI Web of Science, of course, which they used in this paper, and I will use things like PubMed and Google Scholars and Science Direct and other databases in order to reach to a more accurate statistical and more accurate number. I would say the data presented here is accurate by a percentage of anything from 85 to 90%, so it's not 100% accurate data. KSU was number 2 with 350 publications, constituted 38.5%. And King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center came in the 3rd place with 78 publications. And the Eye Center came with 42 publications, and King Abdulaziz University came last with 10 publications. One of the most important things is that something called the H index. Now in the United States, if you go to any place, the first question they ask you is, what's your H index? And the H index is actually an equation developed by a Swiss physicist to measure the impact of your publications and productivity. I will be lying to you if I tell you I understand the equation very well, but the equation is basically designed to measure your citation index. But it's not only citation, it's also productivity. The H index was developed to show the impact of your publication on the scientific community and how many times people cited your work. The H index had some flaws in it. that, for example, it doesn't take into consideration, you could self-cite yourself, or you could, for example, work in a very active group who have a policy of including everybody in the group on the publication. In that case, that will increase your citation index automatically. But it doesn't necessarily mean that your publication is good. So the total citation for this article were 2010,098, and the average citation is 10 citations per article, and the H index is 51, which is not a bad index. The thing is that in the last 5 years, I mean, if we say that these are the 910 publications published by all Arab countries since the record started, you can see that Singapore alone and Singapore Eye Research Institute published something like 600 articles in the last 5 years alone. So obviously, clearly, there is a need for more publication or more research into ophthalmology, and so there is a need for something to be done. This publication, if you want to look at the details of the publication, it was published in a journal called Springer Plus in 2015, volume 4, 42 to 49, and if you search by Google, I'm sure you will find the full access of the document. So the overview of the talk basically, that some people who are not used to writing publications, they find that writing the paper is a very daunting event, and and the problem as we know it, you can have, for example, a good clinician who doesn't know how to write, or a good scientist and who his writing skills is not up to the publication standards. So you do see sometimes people who have high skills in writing, even if their science is less quality than other people, they manage to package it in a way which satisfy the reviewers and get their publications out to the scientific community. So basically, I will give some do's and don'ts out of this lecture. So the scientific writing, the idea of the scientific writing is that you communicate the novel idea. And I will put so many lines under the word novel ideas, okay? You have to understand one thing, that you have to report something new. It doesn't have to be an earth-shattering idea, but it has to be a novel idea. That's the idea of publishing. If you do not have a novel idea, you will not get your publication out to the scientific community, or you will have difficulties in getting it accepted. So the novelty, I would say, that if you thought of the idea and you find something totally novel and you search the literature and you see that nobody did that, almost 70% of your job has been done, even before you started the actual work. Okay. The idea of writing a scientific paper, it have to be clear and simple. Don't forget that the reviewers are actually human beings. And if you don't write clearly and simply and in a logical order, okay, the reviewer, after reading few lines of your paper, he will get fed up. And a studies which has been done 7 years ago, they found that the psychology of the reviewer is determined after reading the first page of the article, or reading the abstract of the article. So 70% of the reviewer make their decision after actually reading only the abstract of the paper. Like most of you, English is not my first language, but obviously writing and having a good command of the English language helps a lot in getting your publication out of the door. A tip I always followed, okay, when you write a paper, always program yourself that you are writing a story, okay? So if I'm telling a story or writing about a story, I have to organize the story in a logical way. I can't write the story that it's confusing, I can't mix things, I can't put things in the right order which confuse the reader. So always imagine yourself that you are writing a story. So here it says that the scientific paper is written and the published report describing original research, original or novel. This is again repeat to what I just said, that it have to be written in a way that basically the reviewer will find it easy to read. Also, when you describe experimental work, whether it's clinical, whether it's basic in the lab, you have to write it in such a way, allow other investigators to actually repeat the work accurately and efficiently. Okay, and some people I think up to 3 years ago, there was a conference for the World Publication Authority regarding that people who actually publish their experimental work leaving important data out for one reason or another. Either they are working and developing a patent, or either they don't want somebody to repeat their work or whatever. So always, so now journals are more strict regarding giving a detailed experimental work, allowing other reviewers, other scientists to actually repeat the work. To send the papers to two journals at the same time. But now, try to avoid this, okay? Because if people discover, there are consequences to this. طبعا here it says avoid salami publication. Salami publication came from the salami sandwich. طبعا we don't eat salami because it's mainly pork. But the idea of the salami sandwich is that you go to the kitchen and you take all the leftover and you put it into a sandwich and you make a sandwich. So people are saying avoid salami publication. So avoid publication where you have no clear idea. You just go there, collect ideas from here and there and there, Well, if you collect ideas out of an experience and you put it in a logical way, that's a different idea. But if you put things just to make a paper, okay, that becomes a salami publication. Try to report novel findings, we talked about that, and have an impact. Impact, it's a relative thing. Until impact, you want people to actually see your publication accepted, have a wider readership. We talk about these things. So we talked about the methods. We said that the methods have to be detailed enough for people to allow people to repeat your work. Now, choosing a journal, we will talk about this in a little bit more details, but the idea is that nowadays the major journals become so inundated with the number of publications comes to them. For example, I'll give you an example of the British Journal of Ophthalmology. British Journal of Ophthalmology, on a weekly basis, they receive 3,000 articles for publication. So what happened is that the major journals became now inundated with the huge number of publication. So the chances of accepting an article out of these 3,000 does not exceed 10% in a good day. So usually, even before going into the reviewers, they will look at your publication, and if it's not really outstanding and things, they will reject it immediately before going through the peer review. So what happened is most journals now, they said, okay, we need to do something. And طبعا the British Journal of Ophthalmology, it's actually a hard copy journal. Okay, so it's a journal, belongs to the group of journal which is the BMJ, British Medical Journals, and it's a hard copy. It comes as a printed. The good thing is about the open access journals, which are not hard copied printed journals, they are only online publication. They actually have opened a new door for scientists to submit their work there. Okay, so if your publication does not get accepted in one of the major journal, you can try one of the open access journals, which does not come as a hard copy and can accommodate more articles. With open access, it comes a fees. And usually the reason for that before the copyright of the article used to go to the publisher. But now you as an author, if you actually pay for the article, you submit to an open access journal, and you pay for the article, actually you are the one who owns the copyright, not the publisher anymore. And obviously the advantage of the open access journal is that you can access the full PDF of the article compared to the printed copies where you have to pay on average $30 to $35 in order to access the article. So eventually there is a German study came in September 2015, and they predicted that in 11 years' time almost all journals will be open access, or at least more than 95% of them, they will become open access. This is of course a good news for people who don't participate in large databases like universities in the US and all of that. They have wide access to full text articles, at least compared to us. طبعا, when the article is open access, that increases your visibility of the article. So there will be more people reading your article, and there will be eventually more people citing your article. Okay, so there is advantage for me as an author to publish in an open access journal. This is another study which was done by the Royal Society. They want to see the author perspective or motivation to publish. Okay, and they found dissemination is 54%, career prospects 20%. Okay, improved funding 13%, ego 9%, okay, and patent protection 4%, okay, and other reasons were 5%. Okay, so it could be in different countries and in different institutes, these statistics could be different. You know, career prospects could be number one, right? And so on. So how the author behave compared to the reader? Okay, so the author, he wants to publish more, and the reader, he wants to read less, right? For the author, peer review is essential because he wants to see how the other colleagues in his field assess his work, okay? And wider dissemination and other journal functions will also be crucial. A reader behavior, he wants to read the summary, maybe, most of the time. He wants to read less. Browsing is crucial, so easy access to the article is very crucial. And he wants an integrated system, meaning that if you do a search, for example, through University of Florida or any other university in the US maybe, you can go through PubMed and it will link you even to the full text article. So you find an article, you like it, you will find the link to the full access article. So obviously the reader wants something easy. So you read about an article, you find it, you want it, so you want an integrated system. الauthor publishing priorities, quality and speed. Okay, let's hope quality is also one of the priorities for authors. and speed. Refereeing speed also. You don't want to submit an article and you are waiting for example, for your promotion, and you want to wait for like 4 or 5 months, okay? One idea you can do to avoid this, if you are not sure, is to actually write to the editor-in-chief, okay? Just select 5 journals which you want to target, write an email, maybe with the abstract of the paper, to the editor-in-chief, and explain to him that, well, you want to know, whether this article will be suitable for their journal and how long on average they take to review the article. So here you are hitting 2 birds with 1 stone, is that you will know how fast they will reply back to you, and you will know whether the article will be accepted, well, not accepted, will be accepted to go for reviewing, okay? So it will not be rejected immediately. الauthor also look for indexing, and indexing طبعا famous ones are the PubMed, which is maintained by the National Laboratory of Medicine, ISI, Institute of Scientific Information, Science Direct, and other databases. The Institute of Scientific Information, universities cared about that because of university ranking is based on publications in the ISI. Obviously, one of the priorities for the author, you want more people to read your paper. So obviously, if you work in cornea, you work in retinal diseases, so maybe you want to publish in journals where that most cornea people read it, okay? So you want wider readership and preferably open access where people can easily access your article. طبعا الريدرز برايورتي اللي هي طبعا زي ما قلنا الانتجريتد سيستم, low or no cost. Nobody wants to pay for example $40 for each article they want to access, ease of access, and authoritative quality articles. Writing papers goes into 3 basic forms. The idea, you carry out the research or the work you want to do, and then you write the paper. طبعا this is papers, obviously. The idea of publishing initially is to actually communicate the idea, is to transfer the idea to the mind of your reader. And obviously to do that, you have to write in a simple, clear way for people to understand. Usually, when you write a paper, there is again another study, I think it was done in Spain. The idea of the paper was very, very interesting, because what they do, they made people write articles in a certain field, and they give it to another people with another specialty. And they wanted to see how much they understood from the article. Okay? So the recommendation of the paper that your article should be written in a way that people in the same area of expertise should understand at least 70% of it, in the same area of expertise. And people in the street, regular guys, should at least understand 20 to 30% of what you are saying, okay, without going into the details of terminology and so on. So the first thing is the idea. As I said, that the novelty in the idea is a very crucial, and it is at least constitute the major part of the article or the research idea. So if you have an idea, the first thing you do, people advise that you discuss it with your peers, because they might refine your idea, they might thought of something you didn't think of. And the second thing you do is you go and see the literature what people actually reported in the literature. Because looking at the literature can actually refine your idea, okay? Refine it in a better shape. You might get ideas to improve your original theory or hypothesis and so on. So the idea is very, very, very important, okay? And that is always, when you choose an idea, try to choose a novel angle, okay? A novel angle in the idea. If you choose an idea which has been studied so many times and things which has been done so many times without getting the novelty part of it, that will be difficult. Usually, if you have so many ideas, or 3-4 ideas for a particular subject, try to focus your paper on one idea and leave the other ideas to other papers. Also, one important thing, let's say your idea, let's say you have 4 points you need to prove, and point number 2 is dependent on point number 1, and point 3 is dependent on point 2, and point 4 is dependent on 3. Now, usually if you try to prove too many things in the same paper, reviewers usually don't like it, because you need to prove point number 1 in a separate article. Once the scientific community accepted that, then you move on to the next idea. Okay, is it clear? So you move to the second idea, which is dependent on the first paper, and you use the first paper as a reference. However, if you try to prove all the 4 points in one paper, usually people don't go for this. It says here at the bottom, if you have lots of ideas, write lots of papers. Ethical approval, it's very, very crucial. انك انت you get ethical approval before you start the actual work. And the ethical approval, usually it used to be done by Institute Review Board. Institute Review Board, when they first were established long time ago, they used to consist of 2 arms, the scientific arm and the ethical arm. After that, the scientific arm was left to the actual departments, okay, whether it's an internal thing, and the IRB is mainly concerned with the ethical approval for the article. Some journals, like for example the Saudi Medical Journal, they request to see the ethical approval itself. It's not enough that you say that, oh, this work has been done according to Declaration of Helsinki, or that ethical approval had been obtained. They want to see it. And in the old days, we used to face lots of problems that people, they come after they do the work, they submit their article, and then the journal requests to see the ethical approval. They come to the ethics committee and they request ethical approval. And of course, ethical approval is very essential, and in certain countries, obviously, it can get you into a very legal dilemma and big problems. And this is one of the most important things, agreement of the co-authors. When you start up a project, okay, you need to make sure that the people working with you understand their inclusion on the paper. You don't want to have a problem when the paper has been done and then you have a disagreement between the co-authors who wants to be the first author. Unfortunately, the international regulation, okay, the international regulation does not talk about the author's order, okay, but the international regulation talk about the inclusion, authorship inclusion. So to be entitled to be an author in a paper, you have to satisfy certain requirements, and these are set by the international standards. However, the order of the authors, okay, the order of the authors, there are no regulation, but there are consensus. There are consensus. For example, usually, the first author are the most junior, and most of the work done by him, okay? Not necessarily his idea, because he could be a junior, for example, first year resident or medical student, and usually he's guided by the guy who runs the group, the research group, or the chairman, who's usually the last author, the last and the corresponding author. طبعا, one of the things the journal did recently to avoid the issue of the first and the second author, if you notice now the recent articles, or at least where the reference style dictate that you have to list the authors, you will find that the first and the second author are listed, not only the first and then etal. So you see the first and the second author. They are trying to be more accommodative to people. طبعا people wants to be first author for lots of reasons. Could be for a promotional reason, like in the university you get half a point if you are first author, and you get quarter of a point if you are not the first author. There are people who wants to be the first author because they want this particular work to be associated with their name. Okay, so if you say work in a certain particular thing and you want to be known in the world that you work on this, you want your name to be mentioned every time this work is mentioned. And the only way to do that is to actually be the first author. So there should be an agreement between the co-authors before, usually you don't want problems at the end of the paper. And before, there was a famous story, it happened at one of the hospitals here, that there was a guy who was collaborating with a group in the US, and then there was a disagreement regarding scientific contents and all of that. So the guy decided to take matters in his hand, and he actually published the article without their names, without including their names. طبعا in the US everything is a legal litigation, so they filed against him for compensation for their time, which was spent on the work, and it was a messy thing, and you don't need this. You really don't need this. So it's always important to agree on the authorship before you start any work. Because to be honest with you, if you disagree about authorship after the work has been done, rarely these issues can be resolved in a amicable way. You have to decide, let's say you have lots of data, okay? So it might not fit into one paper. So what you want to do is to include only the novel findings, or try to include the novel findings. Obviously, if you include the novel findings, you will increase your chances of your papers getting accepted. Here it says not all results will go into the paper, okay? You might use it for other thing, or you might use it to do extra work and maybe submit another paper and so on. This is the point we talked about, which is don't try to prove too many points in one paper, okay? And don't try to prove things which are dependent on each other. As we said, if point 2 is dependent on 1, don't try to publish both of them, and use your point 1 as an evidence that it is an established thing. No, let point 1 established by the scientific community, then do point 2 in a separate paper and so on. For example, you can get ideas for papers, right? Like for example, if you find that you are doing something, right, like you use a novel methodology in the lab and so on, and you find that this methodology, you did some changes and it actually get better results, you might consider publishing this as a methodology paper, okay? So there is always ideas you can get for publishing articles. 3 months ago, well actually 2.5 months ago, I was at University of Florida and I was attending their journal club, okay? And they presented a paper where there were some genetic workup which has been done on that paper. And so after they finished the talk, I was actually criticizing the paper genetically. And then the chairman told me that, Khaled, why don't you write it as a letter to the editor. And I did, and it got published in the British Journal of Ophthalmology. So what I'm saying is that sometimes you get ideas, okay, out of something out of your way even, you know, and letter to the editors is also considered a publication. It's very important that, for example, if you deal with lots of patients and things, is if you work with, for example, with me or someone else or whatever, it's very important that you organize yourself. You organize your records. If you are doing imaging, put all the imaging in one folder, organize it by the patient, medical record number, and all of that. I actually worked with the clinicians, either in KSU and KKESH, where they already collect the clinical, and it make it easy to actually write the paper for them and for me sometimes when I go back to them asking specific questions. It says date the files, obviously, you know, so you know the progress of things. So let's say you do an imaging in January and you do another imaging in February, date your files so you know exactly how things are progressing. In the same folder, for example, you can write ideas which comes to mind. So if you like to continue the work and improve the work by doing extra work. Yeah, this is one of the mistakes people do with tables and figures. When you actually write a table, try to make sure that when you describe the results in the section, don't repeat all the information in the table, okay? So in the results, you can report the important things without detailing the whole things in the table. And when you do figures, also don't try to add the same data you presented as a table, you present it as a figure. You know, it doesn't make any sense, okay? This is, I think, very clear. Choosing a journal, this is very important. Science always is like fashion, okay? And what I mean by that, let's say a certain journal, okay? You will see, for example, if you go to their table of contents, that most of their work about stem cells, okay? So clearly, the interest for that particular time is a stem cell. So if you publish anything in that, highly likely your article will get accepted. The best thing to do is you pick up 5 journals which you think your article will fit into the scope of that. Again, if you're not sure, the best thing is to write an email to the editor-in-chief and say, please, can you tell me, this is the abstract of my study, can you tell me, please, if this fits into the scope of your journal? So if you send to 5 or 10 journals and they reply back to you and they say, oh yeah, it fits into our scope, at least you guarantee that the article will go through the review process. So you save time. Also, look at the table of contents and see, you know, try to determine if your work fits into the journal. Also, determine the audience you are targeting, okay? And, open access or not. When the article is open access, obviously, more people will read your article and more people will eventually cite you. PubMed and ISI indexed. This is important, especially for us in the university. The university encourages us to publish in ISI index journals. And at least, the problem is if you don't publish in an article which is abstracted in PubMed or ISI, nobody will know about you, really. People might do a Google search and they might find you, but usually if you don't publish in journals which at least PubMed abstracted or ISI, then it's a problem. And always be realistic. And when I first started science, I thought anything I do is actually nature work. So I used to run to the chairman saying, look, it's a nature work. And then, you discover that this is not the case. For the English language competency, there are softwares and free resources you can use. Ginger is a very good resource. And it actually rephrases sometimes the sentences, it corrects the grammar. Nothing worse than submitting an article with lots of spelling mistakes. English Manager, science editing, and resources for writing whole papers or a grant. I mean, this is usually for an article, regular article, 3,000 words, they charge something from 70 to 100 US dollars for editing the English and all of that. If you want more, then obviously you pay more. الorganization of the idea اللي هي السوفت وير تبعت العصف الذهني او المايند جيت. المايند جيت هذا عباره عن ايش؟ يعني say I want to write a review, and the review for that review I determined I want to cover something like 150 publications. So what do I do? There are lots of softwares, but the most famous, which I've been using for years, the mind map. And the mind map, the idea of it is that you make a map of the whole thing you want to write. Okay? So you start with the middle idea, and then you link it to an abstract, and that abstract you link it to the full text of the paper. And then that idea you link it to an Excel sheet which have your clinical data. And then that particular data is linked to an imaging of the patient. So the whole thing is actually in front of you. So if you have something complicated you want to understand, or you want to see how people think about it, or you want to write a huge review, mind map is the best way to do it. Okay? And then you can go to the map and add things. Add the studies, add the chart. So you will have a full file in front of you, okay? So you'll have a map of the whole ideas, the whole abstract, and your results are there even, okay? So by one click, you can access whatever. So when you put the whole thing in one place, you will be able to see the overall. Actually, the mind map, I gave a tutorial about it to the resident in University of Florida. They really loved it because they thought it's a good way of organizing all your thoughts and all the material you have in one place. The statistical analysis. Before you start, especially if your project is dependent mainly on a statistic, consult the statistician before you start. Okay? Especially the statistician will be able to help you to choose the right methodology, the correct sample volume, and so on, and the number of patients to recruit and the number of controls. Nothing worse than you do the study and then you come to the statistician, after the study and say, can you do something with these data? It will be too late, right? So it's always advisable to consult with the statistician before you start. Preferably consult with two, because even, for some specialties, like people who are statisticians in genetics, they are different from regular statisticians. And usually they are really, very highly employable. They can basically name their salary. People who are working with statistical genetic, advanced statistical genetic, I'm talking about. So usually if you're doing something like that, try to consult with the right people. Always when you provide the statistic, try to provide them with organized data. Don't put the data in too many different places and so on. Give them a tabulated data, organized. Communication is very crucial between the statistics and the scientist. This is basically talking about the problem, because I'm trying to cover most of the things. Okay. The factors affecting writing a good paper, as we said, good and novel research results. I put it as number one. Okay. Time, you need to be focused. Okay. Your mind is not all over the place. Always imagine that you are writing a story. The story have a start, have some actions, some people in this story, and some events happening in the story, and then the final conclusion out of the story, or the moral you get out of the story. If you program yourself in that way, you will write good paper. Okay? Language, we talked about that. We also talked about that. Here, just some important language points. Poor experimentation cannot be masked by brilliant writing. But I disagree with that. Some people, they are really, really good writings. And when you read it, again, reviewers are, and this is one of the studies I talked about previously, that they found that the psychology of the reviewer, by writing brilliantly, you can capture the reviewer heart and mind. But if your science is great and you are all over the place and spelling mistakes and all of that, the reviewer, after reading one page, he will say, this is nonsense. Okay? Avoid complex sentence structure. Okay? Use simple and clear English, and always keep in mind that the paragraph is the essential unit of a thought. طبعا most papers, they follow what's known as the IMRAD format, اللي هي introduction, methods, results, and the discussion. The title of the paper, people sometimes they don't give the title enough thoughts. The title, in a way, it have to describe the study you are doing concisely. Okay? Title, as a matter of fact, summarize the whole of your study. طبعا إذا كان let's say that your study is a negative study, would you put that in the title? Gray areas, yes or no? Some people, they say, no, it's better to phrase the title in such a way which does not give up the whole results. Okay? But usually the title should summarize the core contents of the paper. الابستراكت طبعا اللي هو summarize the major elements of the paper, اللي هي background, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. In the abstract, try not to mention all your results. This is one of the mistakes people do, and then they exceed the number of words allowed for an abstract. Okay. Introduction. Usually when you write a paper, there is a trick you can do. Okay, which I'm sure most of us have done that. You go to a recent review, okay, especially if the recent review has been done by an individual who is known in that field. Okay, Allahu Akbar. Because most of the time he did the work for you. Okay, so when you write the introduction, let's say that the review was done in 2013, you are writing the article in 2016, obviously you have to cover the literature from 2014 to the beginning of 2016. Okay? In materials, you describe the experimental design and the materials included, or if you included patients, methods, results. طبعا the results, try in the results, one of the mistakes people do in the results, okay, is you summarize the findings without making interpretation. The interpretation, its place is what? In the discussion. طبعا this is easier said than done, because usually when you are writing the result, you tend to go and explain the results without realizing that you are actually now talking about the interpretation. It happens to all of us, okay? The discussion, you make the interpretation of the findings of the study. Let's say you done 5 various experiments and you list them in the results as first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. When you try to do the discussion, try to correlate the discussion with the order of the results. It make it easy for the people to follow. Okay, that's one of the ideas you do for the discussion. A summary or the conclusion at the end, you summarize the findings in very simple words without going again. فلذلك السمري or the conclusion should not include results, numbers, all these kinds of things. Just the major thing you get out of the paper. Acknowledgement, you give credit to people who help with this and who does not satisfy the requirement to be included as an authors. That's what the acknowledgement is for. Okay. References, طبعا I recommend using this is just a simple table for the structure of the paper. Always imagine the abstract is what did I do in a nutshell. Introduction, what is the problem, what I'm trying to do, and what people did before. Materials and methods, how did I solve the problem, okay? And the results is, what did I find out? A discussion, what does it mean, okay? Always if you put these questions, this table in front of you, you will write a good paper. طبعا خلينا احنا اتكلمنا عن هذه الاشياء. خليني اروح طبعا there are softwares to write methods. I mean, I can give you a copy of this if you want to look it up. Tables and figures, discussion. This is basically, I cover it, but by talking, not by the slides. References, طبعا في so many styles, but usually people now use reference managers or EndNote to refer, and the EndNote will organize everything for you. And the EndNote, the last version, which is version 17, it allows you to organize all your references in one place, and you can include it in the paper and all of that. This is just summary of examples of styles for references. And the good news is that the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, they are trying to unify the style of references for everybody. Okay, they are working on that. This is EndNote, which is a fantastic software. I think KSU offer that at a lower rate, and it's available through the university. I did see it on the KSU website. طبعا be aware of the originality and the copyright and acknowledging others. Very important point, plagiarism. Plagiarism, this is where people get things confused. Plagiarism is a huge problem nowadays, and all journals, they have plagiarism check. You have to make sure that even if you are quoting somebody, okay, you have to make sure that you summarize what they are saying, rather than it's a clear statement made by an individual. I will clarify that. Let's say a famous William Shakespeare, he said something, okay? When you report that William Shakespeare said that, you have to write exactly what he said, okay? But when you actually reporting something about a study, you have to rephrase the whole thing. Unfortunately, I didn't see plagiarism check softwares. Okay, these softwares usually available at universities. I seen it at the National Program for Science and Technology. They use it. They use a famous one called Turnitin. And Turnitin will give you what's your plagiarism check, where you have to go and remodify or summarize and so on. The authorship, to be entitled for authorship, طبعا you have to participate in the concept, design, carrying out the work, writing the paper, and approving the final version of the paper. all these 5 things in order to be an author. طبعا أنا I prepared a list of journals in ophthalmology and basic and applied sciences in ophthalmology. بالنسبة للclinical ophthalmology, I put 88 journals. I list them by the highest impact to the lowest impact. And for journals which take basic and applied sciences in ophthalmology, I found 383 journals. You can pick from those journals. I actually put the list based on PubMed and ISI abstracted journals. I sent it to Michelle, so please email her if you want, and she can send you the list for your future references. Okay? Thank you very much, and if you have any questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. We are from Medina. I'm Ashraf Tashkani, the director of the Ahad Hospital program. This is the first time we attend the grand round through the Al-Hay'a. They organized that. We are grateful to your lecture. It was very comprehensive and informative. We don't have a specific question, but if we may have your email so we can get the software of this lecture. This is requested by my residents, please.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Dr. Khalid, can we take questions?
Huh?
Dr. Abdullah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid, for a nice lecture as usual. My question, I want to know your comment regarding the researches in ophthalmology, because here in Saudi Arabia, we're still in the ophthalmology science, and I think in the all medical science, we lack the basic researches. I'm talking about the epidemiology, the incidence and prevalence of a certain disease. Because if you want to go to the novel ideas that you were saying, these are important, but still we are lacking the basic to refer to. So we don't know the incidence of certain disease. So how would we discover a genetic defect in that disease if it is not so common or so? This is what I meant by the question.
Thank you very much. Excellent question. Basically, usually when we do, let's say we are doing association studies, okay? I'm evaluating a certain genetic marker to see whether it's relevant to certain types of glaucoma, okay, compared to the controls. Usually, you do that by genotyping the controls, the people who don't have it, okay? Then you know what's the prevalence of that genetic marker in the controls. طبعا في السعودي Genome Project, one of the ideas of the Saudi Genome Project is that they do the whole genome scan of selected individuals from the Saudi population representing the major tribes, okay? And this information, these start getting released, okay? Because I did see it, there is a project called the 1000 Genome. And the 1000 Genome, it's freely available. If you go there and you search, for example, for the Saudi population, you will find prevalence of certain numbers. If your question about the prevalence of a certain disease, that's a huge problem. Like if you want to know the prevalence of keratoconus in Saudi Arabia as a whole, okay, or the prevalence, this is a huge problem, especially for clinicians, okay? And but again, I mean, you have to go, how did we avoid that? I think when we published the work about glaucoma, the way we did is actually looked at data from KKESH and looked at data from our center, how many glaucoma patients and new glaucoma patients we get every year. And out of that, we we try to figure out how many of those were primary open angle, how many pseudoexfoliation glaucoma, and so on. But I agree with you, this is a very, very important. That's the purpose of what's known as the registry. Registry for diseases like that, honestly, we lack a lot of things. We lack a lot of things. Not only this, we lack a lot of things. But
Dr. Saud?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. Just a small question and a comment. If you have many findings or novel findings,
sorry?
If you have many novel findings, is it better to make it in, if it is small findings, just to make it in a one paper that is more probably to be accepted, or you just split it? So what we have, I don't like this to have split
right.
one paper with many split paper to be, but actually you have many papers to be published.
Right.
So which is much better?
طبعا, of course, if let's say you have 5 novel small ideas, okay. If those novel ideas, like let's say they are 5 novel observations, it's better to put it, especially if it's in the context of one disease or one aspect of a certain disease, it's better to put it in one article. And what I meant by publishing like 5 different articles, if your ideas are dependent on each other, يعني إذا كان مثلا يعني أنت you go to the scientific community and you say to them, I did this, okay, and I developed this methodology and it works, and these are my findings, and because of this finding, I'm concluding this for the treatment. فأنت like that, you are trying to prove too many points at the same time. And each one of those points has not been accepted by the scientific community. يعني أنت you are trying to prove it to yourself, which is not right. So you publish the first thing, let the scientific community accept it, move to the second thing, let the scientific community accept it. But if it's a small idea, no, put it in one art.
Right. The small comments regarding there is an unacceptable way of some journals that they send, I'm a reviewer to some of the journals, they send the details of the writers, the
details of the reviewers.
The
author.
The authors.
Sorry.
The details of the authors to me, so I know who's the author, from where. And this is, I think, some of the journals, it's nicely that they really make it clear for the instruction of the authors that don't write anything that is make the reviewer know from where you are.
I agree totally with you, but this is really a problem. You know why? Because sometimes you work on a certain things and everybody knows that you are the one who is working on this. So even if you don't write your name, people will find out it's you. Okay. The other problem also for projects, and especially here, we did tell King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology many times, don't send us a proposal to review for people here. Okay, where it's a very small community, okay, we all know each other, and it's a conflict of interest. Yani, if I find that, just 2 years ago, I received from Fighting for Sight, which is a UK organization, and for a friend of mine, they sent me a full proposal for £5 million sterling. So I immediately, in that case, you declare a conflict of interest. Because even if you review it, and somebody find out later on that you know the guy, or you work together, or you know him in some other capacity, it's a problem. For conflict of interest, it's very important to declare from the beginning and get out of it.